What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Jonathan Kent, the son of Superman in the Injustice universe, which is amazing. Now, we'll make sense of everything going on with Injustice, and especially one of the theories that you all have, which I love, but this initially opens up with Superman talking to Wonder Woman. Now, one of the things to know about Wonder Woman in the Injustice universe is she'd always kind of had a thing for Superman, but the reality here is he had always been hung up on the death of Lois Lane, and again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit because it's one of the coolest things to happen. But the thing about this is she kind of makes this case in saying that we don't necessarily know what's going on with this kid, so we can't fully put our trust in him. But Superman feels a kind of connection with Jonathan. Now, one of the things that happens jumping over to Jonathan himself is he basically wakes up in a recovery room alongside Lex Luthor. Now, Lex Luthor in the Injustice universe is a little bit different than you normally expect in the main DC universe, because in the main DC universe, he's a main villain of Superman, right? He's just like Superman's arch nemesis and one of the coolest villains in DC Comics. But in Injustice, he falls rank and file with everybody else, and it's a really cool reason as to why. But one of the things he talks about is that where Jonathan initially sees him as Luthor and approaches him as a villain, Luthor realizes pretty fast that he and Jonathan are basically enemies on the Earth that Jonathan comes from. Now, that's one of the cool things that goes on here is it seems to happen off panel, but everybody seems to come to the realization pretty fast that Jonathan is not from this universe and neither is Ultraman. Now, it's kind of a cool moment here because as the two of them start to talk, that one of the things Luthor does is hit to this idea that Superman in this reality has been through a lot and he's trying his best, but he seems to hit to this idea that everything is dark, right? That this version of Superman is not the Superman that Jonathan thinks he is, which is true. This version of Superman is a dick, but he's also one of the coolest versions of Superman ever, and we'll talk about why, because Injustice is so cool. So of course, Luthor doesn't really finish his sentence because Superman shows up, and it's wise for Luthor not to finish that sentence because Superman would likely kill him if he did. And so what ends up happening is that Jonathan kind of explains what's going on and saying that there's a villain named Ultraman who's traveling around the multiverse and killing different variants of Superman across the entire multiverse. Now again, we don't necessarily know exactly why Ultraman's doing this, or at least was doing it. I mean, he's dead now, but we simply knew he was doing it by way of using a device that would basically depower or at least weaken any version of Kal-El he came across in any other universe. Hence the reason why they grabbed Superman in the first place. By the way, that was my mistake in the last video. I always confuse Val-Zod and President Calvin. President Calvin is the leader of the House of Heroes and the Multiversal Justice League. Val-Zod, he's the Superman from Earth 2. Do you guys remember that story at the beginning of the New 52 when like the whole Justice League were killed by Steppenwolf in like the first issue and like issue number 1? But again, that's my mistake. That's my error. It was Val-Zod. He's the Earth 2 Superman. So the thing about this is that you basically have the Flash come running in, right, and tell them like there's some crazy thing going on in Star City, that kind of situation. We have to respond. They talk about how it has to basically do with Batman. And so what this does is it leads to Superman and Wonder Woman taking off to confront Batman, and where Jonathan wants to go along for the ride, the response is no, right? But then ultimately he says, I can't just stay here. I have to go there and find out what's going on. And so we transition over to Gotham City. Now, here is where the theory comes into play, and I love that you guys have this idea. So we didn't really finish Injustice 2, the follow-up to the Injustice comic, but basically Superman was defeated at the end of Injustice. As far as I'm aware, if I remember correctly, he was basically captured and locked up, but like the whole thing was effectively done. Here, you still have Batman and Superman fighting against one another. So the theory that you guys have is that when Jonathan and Ultraman traveled to the Injustice universe, they traveled to the past of the Injustice universe. Because one of the things that was solidified in the last 2 issues that we covered is that time follows the same path in every single universe, right? It's 1983 in every universe, no matter what universe you're in. It's 2006, it's 2023, it's always the same. So by all standards of measurement, Superman should be defeated at this point in time, unless of course it's all happening at the time that Injustice is taking place. We don't really have any definitive answers, but the fact that Batman is still here is kind of a big deal. Now, this is where I want to talk about Injustice here for a second, because this is the reason why Injustice is so cool. So the idea behind Injustice Gods Among Us, the comic book line, is that the Joker had kidnapped Lois Lane, who was pregnant with Superman's unborn child. In turn, Superman and the Justice League were trying to find her, but Joker had killed Scarecrow and taken some of his fear toxin along with green kryptonite and a nuclear bomb. Come to find out, when Superman found Lois Lane in a submarine, what the Joker had done is he had laced the fear toxin with green kryptonite dust, so that when Superman entered into the submarine, he didn't see Lois Lane, he saw Doomsday. Doomsday. Batman, who was figuring it all out, figured it out at the last moment, and really when it was too late, because Superman had basically been pummeling Doomsday and then flew Doomsday into space, where Doomsday was believed to have suffocated and died, only for us to find out Superman was tricked into killing Lois Lane and his unborn child. Not only that, the Joker had taken the nuclear bomb and basically attached it to Lois Lane's heartbeat, so when she died, Metropolis was destroyed in a nuclear blast. It was amazing! Like, it was one of the most crazy openings to a story ever. And then in turn, Superman just becomes this dictator, right? He's like, enough, right? He kills Joker on the spot, and he was like, if you're a villain, you commit a crime, you're gonna die. And that's just the way that it is, right? Or you're gonna go to jail. There's no more of this Batman philosophy of like, I cherish my no-killing rule. I don't care how many men, women, and children have to die in order for me to keep it. Like, anybody who commits a crime is done. We covered it. You'll find a link to the Injustice playlist down in the comments section. Check it out when this video is done. It was a phenomenal story. But the thing about this is that Batman and his forces were basically like the rebels. They were fighting against the forces of Superman. When we switch to Gotham City, we pick up with Damian Wayne. The story of Damian was really cool because what happened is that there was a fight between the forces of Superman and Batman, and Damian was kind of on the fence. But in a fight between himself and Nightwing, he actually ended up killing Nightwing by accident. Nightwing fell and broke his neck because of an attack from Damian Wayne. Batman blamed Damian, and then Damian sided with Superman, which he was already kind of doing that by this point in time. But it's a really, really cool moment because when this happens, you literally have Damian confronting Batman. That's the reason why there's animosity here between the two of them. It's not just a father and son bickering, it's Damian on the side of Superman and Batman on the side of the rebels. So of course the two of them break out into a fight, but then Jonathan steps in, and Jonathan tries to stop the fight between the two of them. Now, one of the things to remember, Damian has what seems to be enhanced strength here, because it looks like at this point in time, Damian may very well have just popped the pill that was established in the Injustice comic. For those of you guys who don't know that, it was a pill that was developed that could give a person the powers of Superman. Hence the reason why Jonathan points out that Damian is so much stronger than he normally is. But Damian, at this point in time, because Jonathan doesn't exist, Damian doesn't see him the same way, right? Like, Jonathan was dead. It was the unborn child of Lois. And so that's what's nuts, is because in this moment, Batman's able to get away. Now, with Batman making his escape, you in turn have Superman and Lois Lane who show up here on the scene. And to a degree, Jonathan kind of gets chastised by Damian a little bit, but at the same time, like, you have this conversation between Jonathan and Injustice Superman, where basically Injustice Superman lies. Like, he literally lies, right? He's like, there was a tragic accident, Dick Grayson died, Bruce blamed Damian, and then Damian blamed himself too. His father cast him out and basically disowned him. It's time we talk about what happened, right? So Injustice Superman comes along and says, like, your mother was taken from me. We were supposed to have a child. We were supposed to have you. I reacted poorly to this. I was lost for a while. But in time, a new resolve grew from my grief. I decided to do more for this world, to make this a world of less tragedy, a world where madmen, villains, and tyrants were no longer free to harm people. Now, on the surface, it looks like he's led the Earth into a better place. He genuinely believes that. It's one of the things to know about Injustice Superman. Everything he did because he believed he was doing the right thing. And you can make a moral argument where he was. Lord knows we did over the course of Injustice, right? Like freedom versus security, all that kind of stuff. But the thing about this is he genuinely believed that what he was doing was right. The reality here is that he was a dictator, man. He was a fascist. Whether you believe what he was doing was right or not, he became tyrannical. He was like one step away from Superman Red Sun, where he basically turned everybody into like a robot under the power of Brainiac and basically bent the world to his whim, right? Like you get to the end of the story and Lex Luthor's like, why don't you put the whole world in a bottle, Superman? That kind of a thing. It was cool, right? It was a really, really cool moment in that story. But Injustice Superman portrays everything as though he's genuinely made the world better. So in turn, Jonathan says, I want to see what the world's like, but I want to do it alone. I want to do it by myself. And so he ultimately takes off. Now that's when Wonder Woman meets with Injustice Superman and asks the question, do you really think that's a good idea, right? He may not necessarily approve of your methods, but the response of Injustice Superman is maybe he won't, but he will come to the realization that the ends justify the means, that the way in which we got to this place is fine because there is no crime. And in fact, that's one of the things that Jonathan notices flying around in the world. He says this world is so similar to ours, the people, the places, but I can feel it. The air is slightly cleaner. Climate change is being reversed. And if I reach out, if I let down the blocks I always have in place, I cannot hear bombs or gunfire. It's so quiet. I can just hear how quiet it is. The world is quite literally a peaceful place. There's no crime or anything. But in turn, he hears what sounds like a kind of crisis. He responds with a baby that basically fell off a balcony. He rescues it, and then he flies it back up to the mom. And then the mom starts to panic. She fills with fear. But Jonathan realizes it's not him, not his face that she's looking at. It's not her looking at him and saying, oh my God, you're Superman. It's horrifying. It's the symbol on his chest. The yes, instills fear in people. Now, the thing about this is the question that we asked, right? And I'm curious, for all the new fans out there, I'm curious, right? If Superman becomes a dictator, but it leads to a world without crime and without violence, where people can live without having to worry about whether or not they're going to die, so long as they don't cross Superman, is that a good thing? Is it an inherently good thing? Or should people be allowed to live a life free to make their own choices, even if that means sending the world back into a place where it's full of chaos, madness, and death? Which one would you choose in this circumstance? And it's not a loaded question. That's what the world would turn back into, because that's what it was. But the thing here is that you have this kind of discussion, this almost momentary thing, where literally in Justice Superman says, what do you think? You can see it, can't you? What we've done here, the difference we've made. And that's where Jonathan, observing everything, says the world is so quiet, but not because it's peaceful, not because it's free. Yes, I can see it. It's quiet because everyone is holding their breath, because everyone is afraid to make noise. Here's the question you have to ask. What happens when a fight breaks out between Injustice Superman and Jonathan Kent? And which one's gonna come out on top? Because Injustice Superman is a hoss. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.